It's the end of 2021, and you know, in years past, I remember those times when people said, phew, I'm glad that year was over. That year was terrible. On to a new year. I've not seen one person say that this year. I have not seen a single person say, glad that's over, on to the next year, because we've all realized that that means nothing. We all realize it doesn't end, it just carries over into the next year. We all know nothing's getting better. Things will only ever get worse. Fortunately, we have video games. We have video games to play while the world burns around us. And at least that's something. At least we can retreat into entertainment and shut out the world around us, because we don't have the power to change anything anyway. So, time to talk about the 10 games I liked for 2021. So let's think about the rules, because there's got to be rules when talking about your top 10. Weird, arbitrary rules. Some people say that you can only pick the games that came out that year. Some people say you can just pick any game that you played. Why not? I do a wishy-washy kind of meeting in the middle and say that the top 10 games, I feel, should probably be games that are new, games that came out this year, but then there are games that came out maybe last year or 2 years ago that I never got to and I wanted to play, and if I played them this year, I think that should count, because hey, it's not like we have the time. Not like we have infinite time to play everything every year. Certainly games this year I didn't play. So I mean, if you expected something to appear on this list and it's not there, hey, maybe I just didn't get around to playing it. That could be. So basically my top 10 games that came out this year, maybe games that came out in the last couple of years. But because I am defining it in that way, that does leave one particular game out that I do think I need to mention, and I guess this will be outside of the top 10 list. How about we have my best old game of the year, where it's a game I played this year, but it hasn't been re-released, and it hasn't even been mentioned by the publisher for quite a few years, so I think we're going to make a special exception for one particular special old game. Let's break these rules, let's get down to it, and take a look at the best old game of the year. That's right, it's Ghost Trick. Not that much of a surprise. Ghost Trick is a fantastic game. I have heard about it in years past, but never actually got around to playing it until this year. Did a playthrough of it on the stream, and enjoyed it greatly, and was just kind of amazed that this game has never been re-released. Like, the DS original came out in 2011. That's the version that I streamed. The version you're seeing right now is the iOS version. This one came out in 2012, the following year. You can still buy that game on the iOS store. And those are the only releases. It's very strange to me, because I felt this game held up very well. You could release this today, it would not feel aged at all, just because of how completely different it is from most other games. Great writing, fun characters, great visuals and music. Animation, which is still strikingly good even today. I did enjoy playing on the DS version. The iOS version is a little bit more high-res and is reorganized to be shown on a single screen. Whichever version you want to play, you're going to get a really good adventure game full of personality and heart. And I don't know why Capcom has not re-released this on anything since then. It seems like something that should get a re-release on modern platforms. It has not. But I just wanted to mention this because this did not come out this year, not last year, the year before, or did not even come out this decade. That's right, this is a 10-year-old game. And I enjoyed it more than many of the new games I played this year, which is why I wanted to acknowledge Ghost Trick as being my best old game of the year. Nearsighted Jigo, he never misses, just as long as the target is in point-blank range. So, I would definitely say, play Ghost Trick. You'll get a great story, with great presentation, and some fun light puzzling, and you will learn why Missile is the best boy. So that's our old game. That is the old game of the year. Ghost Trick, fantastic. And I just wanted to mention that because there's really no way to twist things around to say that that is a new game of any kind. Even though you can still buy it on the digital store, that being iOS, and play it on a modern device. I played it on an iPad. I still wanted to mention that. But now that I've mentioned that, maybe we should be getting to the actual top 10. So, a lot of people saying this year were weak on the game releases, but I disagree with that. I played a number of games that I greatly enjoyed. Some games that I didn't enjoy too much, but hey, we're not talking about them. We're talking about the games that I really liked. And I felt this was just as strong of a year as anything. Like maybe if you're looking for the big AAA releases, you know, maybe it might have been a little light on that. But come on, you know that the most interesting video games usually don't fall in that category. We're looking at the real good, real interesting stuff. And that means we're going to get started right now with number 10. Inscription is a game that I would not say is on the obscure side, not on the AAA side, but plenty of people have heard of this. A lot of people talking about Inscription here at the end of the year 2021. It's a new game from Daniel Mullins. I previously played his Pony Island, had not played the Hex. New game from him. What apparently was a card building, card battling game, but leaning also heavily on puzzles and story. The Inscription really attracted my attention. I should say the first third of Inscription really attracted my attention. I tried out this game, ended up playing it all night long, and kind of lost track of time, and looked back at the window sometime in the morning and realized, oh, sun's coming up. Huh. Been a while since that happened, since I started playing a game in the evening and then looked at the window and the sun was coming up. I think maybe the last time that happened was Into the Breach. Remember that? It happened with me with that one. And it also happened with me with Inscription, where the first part of the game really captivated me, really made me interested. I say first part because, well, if you've played the game, you know that the game does switch things up a couple of times as you go through. Variety is nice, but I still do feel that the first part of the game is the strongest. And on that point, though, however, it does appear that Daniel Mullins is continuing to update Inscription and adding an endless mode to the first part of the game, which is very good. That's something that would definitely increase the replayability of Inscription for me, to be able to just have a special mode where you're replaying that early part. It's sort of a a roguelite replayable thing. What is Inscription? Well, you can see it right here. It's a card game. I mentioned it's heavy on puzzles, heavy on story. It's kind of hard to describe really what the attraction to Inscription is. The card game is quite simple. It doesn't require you to memorize complex rules, though as you keep going on, the rules do become more complex. It's a very fun game to play. It's very interesting to look at the scenarios they present to you with the cards you have and the cards the opponent has and try to work out the puzzles of how you can come out on top with the cards that you have. Because frequently, they will give you a way to come out on top. Sometimes it might be hopeless, but the game does a very good job of giving you opportunities. And I think that's one reason why this game seems to have attracted the attention of people who don't usually play card games. Because with a real, I say pompously, with a real card game, it's like, you know, fair, one-on-one. You have a deck. If you don't know what you're doing, you're going to get torn apart. Inscription, well, it wants to make it fun. It'll help you out. Maybe you don't realize it's helping you out, but it does. Because it's less of a real card game and more of a game that's supposed to be fun. A game you're supposed to enjoy playing as you advance this story. I definitely really enjoyed playing this. I liked the atmosphere. I like the interactions with your opponent. You can see his eyeballs there. Great presentation. Audio design is great. But like I said, there are separate parts of the game where they switch things up. I felt the first third was the strongest. Did not feel that the second and third parts of the game really lived up to that first part, unfortunately for me. I know some people really like this game all the way through from beginning to end. For me, I was like, well, I beat the game. I enjoyed it. But this part of the game you're seeing here was the part that I liked the most. And I'm thinking about what would be my favorite moment from the game. Well, I said the first third of the game is my favorite, but I think my favorite actual moment came out in the last third. I'm going to give some light spoilers. I should mention that. Light spoilers as I'm talking about these games. I can't really talk around it. There's a gimmick in one of the matches that I would just want to mention. This is sort of a game that has not emergent gameplay, but there are certain emergent moments that might hook you, and some might not. And for me, a part that really got me, what I would say was my favorite part, was in the last third of the game. There was a certain match, a certain card game, in which, light spoilers again, that had a certain gimmick, in which the opponent wanted you to search your hard drive to look for old files, because the opponent valued old files. Files that mean something to you. Files that maybe have an emotional connection. So they wanted you to pick your oldest file. So, you know, it just so happens that I carry over a lot of the old files from PC to PC. So I have some folders that have some really old files. And looking at them, I noticed a particular file from little over 10 years ago. It was an MP3. It was a guitar cover of The Woods and the Goddess from Deadly Premonition. Someone made it during the Deadly Premonition LP and posted it in the Something Awful thread. That person, well, if I remember this correctly, they just kind of left that online identity. I don't think there even be a way of finding that person anymore. This MP3 is the only last piece of evidence I have that this person ever existed. So I selected that file, because that is old. And when I did, the song started playing in the game, because I guess that happens when you choose an MP3. So now the match continues with the song playing. And the opponent says, if I lose, they'll delete the file. And the game has done such a good job at this point of being convincing, I really didn't know if it was serious about that. I ended up winning the match. But for a second, I was convinced maybe it might delete the MP3. It didn't happen. but it made for a very atmospheric and tense match that was very specific to my circumstance, to my particular circumstance, that it's not something that's going to happen in another game or specifically to another person. That was just for me. That was a bit for me. And even though there was a good deal of Inscription that I got tired of, especially later in the game, that was a very memorable moment for me in this game. And so, Inscription is my number 10 of 2021.
I'm gonna go full on.
No More Heroes 3 was a game I was looking forward to. Not really surprising that because it's a game from Grasshopper Manufacture, a game from Suda, a continuation of Grasshopper's most, well-known franchise, even though, of course, my favorite was Killer 7. No More Heroes was their big franchise. Also, they had brought back the franchise with Travis Strikes Again, but that was a pretty different kind of game. No More Heroes 3 promised to be a new, proper No More Heroes. And there was a little bit of, anxiety possibly about how this was going to turn out, because when you have the old game maestro returning to try to make a new one of the old thing that he made that you liked, well, it's hard to say how that's going to turn out. But I really enjoyed No More Heroes 3. There were aspects of its elements that you can tell maybe were a little underdone, such as some of the environments.
Here we go!
Maybe some of the side stuff. But what is there, I think, is very good as far as the gameplay, the fighting, the smoothness. I do appreciate they went for a locked 60 FPS on the Switch. Not to bag on the Switch or anything, but I do appreciate that they went for the frame rate for these combat sections. I had a lot of fun playing this. Even got the Joy-Cons, even got them out instead of using the Pro Controller, so we can play it properly with the motion controls to do the finishing moves with the beam katana. You don't have to do that, but you want the genuine experience, and you can only do that with the Switch because you can swing the Joy-Cons. I felt this was, in addition to being fun, I felt that this was a very charming game. I thought they did very well with the atmosphere and the mood, and a feeling of that Travis and the characters have actually gotten older and moved on in their places in life. There is some feeling in this game, the feeling of the march of time, of not being young forever, where Travis still, steps up for one more adventure with the beam katana, but he's older. He's not the same man he was before. He even says that right at the beginning of the game, where he says that there are still heroes left in the world, and that is him. Whereas that's something he probably would not have said as a younger man. The story is nonsense. Let's not even pretend. Let's not even pretend that there's any kind of anything that connects it all together, but it's a very fun kind of nonsense.
I'm gonna crush you!
It gave me what I wanted. Even if the game felt cut short in some directions, you have parts like the scene where you see all the bosses as action figures on a rack, and that's how they introduce the bosses to you. Things like that, or like the anime intros and endings, how each boss section is its own episode.
Left?
It all felt like it came together very well for me. Now, not everyone might feel that same way, because some people might focus on how not every boss had their own area, how the sections of the game that you explore maybe should have had more in them. Sure. I felt what was actually in the game, however, came together very well for me. Also, I would say that this game probably had my favorite music track of the year, that being the anime credit theme, Night in Prague. of which there are a few remixes. Every chapter ends with a different cover of Night in Prague. I still think that is my favorite, that's my favorite track of the year. As far as my favorite moment in this game, considering the nature of the game, that it's a game where as you're playing the game, you're learning how to play the game. You're learning how to use the beam katana, how to learn to use your techniques, getting the timing down on perfect dodging, trying to make it all come together. I would say that the best moment in a game like this is when you get to that one fight where everything does come together just so, and you end up completely steamrolling the enemy. Now, that might come earlier in the game, it might come later, but there's going to be a point in the game where that happens. And for me, that point where it all came together was my fight with Destroy Man, which, if you want to watch the streamed playthrough, it was on that. That was the fight where everything that had been learning throughout the game came together with a lot of luck, and that was a complete stomp of a fight. And that's the big satisfying part of this kind of game, I think. So I would say that's probably my favorite moment of the game. I would have liked if there was a bit more from like the side characters, like Shinobu, Bad Girl. I would have liked if there was some more from those side characters. There's not. All right. They did have to cut where they had to cut, but I greatly enjoyed what we had to play. I was very happy that Suda got to direct and write another game, and I was very happy to get a final adventure, probably a final adventure, with Travis Touchdown. And if No More Heroes never comes back, I feel that it is a good, complete series. Fantasian is a game that kind of no one has talked about this year, as far as I can tell, and that entirely has to do with the platform it's on, as it is an exclusive to Apple Arcade. But I was interested in playing this, so I played it on my iPad throughout the year. It's a game I was interested because it's a new traditional JRPG made by Mistwalker, directed by Sakaguchi, and with a soundtrack by Uematsu. Very big names from the earlier days of JRPGs. This game came out in two parts. Part 1 came out earlier in the year, April 2nd, and Part 2 came out on August 13th. The two parts together make one entire game. You might notice it has a striking look to it because the backgrounds are not 3D graphics nor pre-rendered. The backgrounds in this game are all entirely handmade dioramas. You're seeing photos of dioramas with polygonal characters running around on them. It's a very beautiful looking game. Some of these diorama backgrounds look very good. I haven't played many RPGs in quite some time. I used to play them back in the 16-bit era, I like the Phantasy Star games. I like Final Fantasy, Chrono Trigger. Not a genre I've played all that much in the past few years because I tend to gravitate towards shorter games as I've gotten older, and RPGs tend to be longer. And this is a big reason I think why this is on my top 10 list, because when I beat this game, I believe the timer was 69 hours. No, it's not a joke. I think it actually was 69 hours. And I never actually got tired of playing the game. I never really got bored of it. I never really wanted to move on from it. I just, I enjoyed it all the way through. And that's very rare for me, to play a game for that long and to just not move on to something else. So this game has to have something going for it. It's a very standard JRPG in many respects, however. The combat is very turn-based JRPG. The gameplay in general is JRPG. The dialogue could have just been straight out of a 16-bit Squaresoft RPG on the Super Nintendo. It's not complex writing. It's not sophisticated writing. It's a very simplistic JRPG plot. Hey, do you like the idea of a plucky young hero meeting a girl of destiny and a band of friends, and maybe they might have to kill God? You know, maybe something like that might happen in this game. But I felt overall this was a very comfortable game. It was a game I just like to relax with and play for an hour or two here or there. A game that I just like to spend some time with. It's not a... Well, I was about to say it's not very demanding, but I'll get into that. Before I mention that, I just want to say, I mentioned that the soundtrack is by Nobuo Uematsu. He says this could potentially be the last full soundtrack he ever makes, due to his, he's getting on in age. Don't know if that'll be true, but it is possible this is the last soundtrack he'll do. As far as how good the soundtrack is, there's some tracks that I really like. That's one reason that I had that we're looking at this forest stage, because I really like the music in it, so I just wanted to get a good clear sample of the music at the beginning of it when they were talking. Some of the tracks are better than others, but I think that there is some real good music in this game. Some beautiful music is appropriate for the beautiful dioramas. One thing I want to mention. I mentioned that this game's not demanding. I cut myself off there because, okay, the difficulty of this game. The difficulty scales normally, as you might expect for a game like this, in the first half of the game. Second half of the game, they decide that the bosses are all going to be super bosses. You know how RPGs tend to have, like, really powerful optional bosses? What if they weren't optional? What if they're just on the story path? I understand what they were doing. Basically, okay, you get to the second half of this game, you start getting less experience in general, so you can't really over-level yourself. They stop you from doing it because they want you to engage the bosses and figure out the tactics of how to beat them. I understand what the purpose was and why they wanted to do that, but that is a big reason why it took me 69 hours to beat this game. Oh, also, they could go with some higher resolution images, I think, of the dioramas. Some of them a little bit low, like right here. They could go with some higher res images. But yeah, the second half of this game, if you do want to play it, be prepared for it to get pretty demanding in the back half, where you will die repeatedly. You will get steamrolled by bosses, and you will have to figure out the precise equipment, tactics, and techniques to do in order to overcome them. That is something that's very important to say about this game, because you won't expect it. The first half of the game's pretty easy. Its second half of the game kind of comes out of nowhere. Right now, the main character's talking about a Dimension machine. There's like a little mechanic in this game. It's kind of neat. You might have noticed how many random battles there have been. They let you mitigate that somewhat by turning on the Dimension, the combination word of dungeon and dimension, where when it's on, monsters get teleported to your own pocket dimension. When it gets full up, you have to fight them all, but you can turn it on and off to reduce the amount of monsters that you're fighting as you go. It's an interesting little mechanic. They didn't want to get rid of random battles altogether. You still have the random battles, but they do let you minimize that a bit as you're going through areas that maybe have a lot of monsters. What is my favorite moment in this game? Well, I have to say, considering the difficulty of this game in the back half, my favorite moment was the final hit on the final boss. After trying that final boss, I don't know how many times, over 20, after something like a 40-minute battle, I got to a part where if I didn't kill the boss on this turn, I'm dead the next turn. And on my final attack, the boss blew up. It was very satisfying. It's the kind of satisfaction that comes from a really difficult fight. And, I mean, that was just, it felt really good. It felt really good to see the boss explode. I might also say, another favorite moment of mine, I mentioned that with the Uematsu music, some of the tracks I didn't like too much. That includes a bunch of the battle tracks. So another one of my favorite moments is once you get to the end game bosses, the boss music changes, and you get rock music playing with lyrics, with a Japanese man just singing his heart out as you fight those endgame bosses, and I was really psyched when the boss music changed to that. It was very good. So that, I think, was also my favorite moment of the game. It's Fantasian. I hope this comes out on other platforms. I enjoyed it quite a bit. Devotion was a game that I was looking forward to for 2 years, really, because this did come out in 2019. But we know the story, that it was removed after only a few days after going on sale, and then it vanished, never to be seen again until this year, when Red Candle Games fortunately started being able to sell it from their own website. So, played it this year, streamed it this year, and got to see what people were talking about, because there was a lot of talk around it. Had a lot of mystique around this game due to its unavailability. And I was very impressed by this game. I was very taken in with its story. On the surface, it looks like a game that you might describe as a PT-alike. Plenty of those. Devotion, however, I would say the thing that really makes this game shine is, in video games, it's unusual to see a story that I would actually consider to be haunting. No shortage of games that try to do that. No shortage of games where the writers try to maybe punch above their weight level to try to make a serious, haunting tragedy. And there are so many failures at trying to do that kind of thing. And I was just taken by how Devotion was able to go for a story that has such heavy subject matter and present it so well. A story like this could go real bad. We've seen stories like this go real bad. And Devotion just strikes me as one of the best versions of a video game that is trying to tell an actual serious haunting story. Now, I do like to be positive when it comes to these top 10 games, but it's at this point I have to contrast this to another game that came out this year that attempted to have a haunting story, that being The Medium. The Medium was a game that attempted to tackle the subject of mental illness and how that can hurt the people around you. So, you might say it's similar to Devotion in that way. But the outcome was completely different, in which my opinion of the medium was, oh no, you don't know how to write about this. You don't know how to write about this subject matter. You know, the heavier the subject matter, the better the author needs to be. If you're gonna write the story for a Super Mario game, there's not too much in the way of expectations. If you're actually going to try to write a story that tackles the idea of child abuse, trauma, and how that can affect people and how they act, you're taking on a certain amount of responsibility there, that you can present a well-done, well-written, respectful story. And I feel Devotion is an excellent example of a game that does that actually pulls it off. Whereas the medium is the complete opposite, the complete polar opposite of that. And I think that's why Devotion stands out to me so much. In terms of the gameplay, hey, we've seen this kind of gameplay before. You walk around a house, well, an apartment, hallways, rooms. You look at items, you read files. We've seen that kind of gameplay many, many times. That's not exceptional. But the way they present this story, the way everything comes together, the environments that they did build, I do feel that this is a step above most every other horror game that we've seen come out in the last number of years. I really enjoy games like Resident Evil, of course, but I mean, it's a very different kind of story, very different kind of game than Devotion. I feel that in terms of telling a real serious story, this does a much better job than a lot of the other horror games that we see that try to tackle it. I don't really want to say much about the story. It's a short game. You know, I beat the game in one night, maybe 3 hours, possibly. Not a long game. The game is all about unwrapping this story and finding out what happened to the family who lived in this apartment. So I don't really want to say too much about it because that's the entirety of the game. I can't really... It's hard to say about having a favorite moment in this, because it's not really a game about moments. Not really a game that you would say, oh man, that moment was badass. It's not really that kind of game. What I would say is that instead of a favorite moment, what this game does very well is there is a slow, dread-filled unveiling of a story. And the dread doesn't come from the fear of scares, doesn't come from the fear that something's going to jump out in front of you, but the dread comes from a feeling of inevitability of how this story is going to turn out. You kind of know how it's going to happen, and you don't have any way of changing it or stopping it, even though you can clearly see what they could have done for things to turn out differently. As far as being a real tragedy of a story, I feel that Devotion does this better than most any other game I can think of. That is why I have Devotion here as number 7 on my top 10 games of 2021. If you like horror, if you like a sad story, if you're interested in seeing a well-done, well-represented sad story with some heavy material, Devotion does it better than just about anything else. That's why it's on the list. I wouldn't have thought that a Record of Lotus War game would be on my top 10. Record of Lotus War is an anime that I watched many years ago in those early days of watching anime when I was an anime baby. I liked it, but I haven't seen it since then. I only vaguely remember the characters and the setting and the events. But this game came out. Record of Lotus War, Deedlit in Wonder Labyrinth, a very lengthy title. And it immediately got my attention because of, well, look at it. It looks like Symphony of the Night, right? There's many similarities with this game and Symphony of the Night. They are really not trying to hide that. And I think this game plays excellently. I had a lot of fun playing this. I think that Team Ladybug, the developers of this game, really nailed how this game moves, controls, feels, the abilities of the character, how the boss fights work, how the levels could have been bigger and more complex. But as far as actually playing this game and controlling this character, it feels really good. I really like how it looks. You have these big, colorful, arcade-looking graphics. I like the sound. The soundtrack, not as big as like a Castlevania game, but I did enjoy the music that was there. The story takes place after the anime, Record of Lotus War. Do you need to be caught up with the story? No. Story's honestly not that important, which is good. This is not exactly a story-heavy game. There is some dialogue in the game. The characters talk to each other. It's not that important, but, you know, if you are interested in Lotus War, if you wanted to see how this game might connect with the old anime, and my understanding, new products coming out in that franchise, this game is supposed to have some connective tissue there, but honestly, doesn't really matter for me. Like I said, game plays excellently. The only complaint I would really have, game is short. Pretty short game. Now, I do like a short game. That's not necessarily a bad thing for me. But I feel like this game plays so well, it could have supported being twice as long. As it is, it feels like you get to know how to control this character, you get a large amount of magic spells and weapons and such, and then the game's just over. So it is quite short. But then again, it does mean that it is short enough that you could do like an entire playthrough in one session, you know, once you already know what to do. As far as what my favorite moment in this game is, I would say my favorite moment probably came right at the very beginning of the game, after controlling the player character for a minute and realized that this game feels exactly as I would want it to. Because that's so important when you're talking about a game like this. You have to... There's a lot of stiff competition when it comes to this particular genre, and when you're making a game that specifically looks a lot like Symphony of the Night, even down to the character's walking animation. Look at when she walks. Look at her animation. That is a very deliberate animation that they're going for there. And this game is not the length of Symphony of the Night, but I would really put the gameplay of this, put the presentation of this, I would really put this up against most any Metroidvania that's come out over the past few years. I don't know what else I would say about the game, because really what it just comes down to is that it is a lot of fun. And it is a game that I definitely can go back to for just like a quick playthrough. I have nothing else to do, just want to play through it again. Like I said, that's one good thing about why it's so short. Use the bow and arrows to raise the elevator. There's bows and arrows. You have to aim precisely with them sometimes, but sometimes you just swing your sword through hallways of zombies. Yeah, I think the presentation of this game really nails the look of what I would want to see from this. I greatly enjoyed Bloodstained from last year. Bloodstained, of course, went for a very different look. It went for a more modern look, which made some people not so happy. You know, some people wanted a game that looked like more like the old 2D Castlevanias, and even though I really like Bloodstained, I do enjoy that this game went directly for that old look and did such a good job of it. This game does change things up a little bit in some ways. It has sort of an Ikaruga style color change system. You have wind element and fire element, and you switch between them, giving your weapons those particular elements, and they'll be stronger against some enemies, weaker against other enemies. It also change what you're strong and weak in terms of defense yourself. So you're constantly switching between the two elements. If your elements have levels. If your element is at level 3, you can switch that element and your health starts replenishing, like right now. But you have to watch out because you don't want to get hit, because that will lower your element level and you'll stop getting healed. Deedlit is kind of a glass cannon. She takes a lot of damage. The reason she takes a lot of damage is because if you're doing well, you can just replenish your health in that way. A lot of damage being taken, a lot of health being restored, a lot of switching back and forth between elements and magic spells and weapons. The map is pretty simple, but that's not a bad thing. Like I said, I greatly enjoyed it. I would have liked more. I would have liked it more to be built on this foundation, because the foundation is really good. If it was bigger, longer, more complex, they could definitely, like I said, I think this game definitely could have supported a game that was twice the length. I think I beat the game in 5 hours. I could see them making a 10-hour game of this. But as it is, I mean, if I'm saying that the only complaint I have about a game is that there's not enough of it, it's a pretty good complaint to have. So, that is Record of Lotus War, Deedlit in Wonder Labyrinth, and that's number 6 on the list.
And into Asylum, like a great black engine roaring to eternity, ravaging the already benighted landscape with its savage, malevolent presence. And within the legions of the truly damned, insanity, sheer and stark, and once in human form, now gutted and torn by eons of glutted indulgence. Their bloodlust flecking the oily walls, living in the shrieks of victims ensnared, hanged, drawn, and quartered by the serpent's squalid writhings. This is the place I have not wanted to dream of, and the dream is now the place I partly live through.
Shadow Man Remastered was a surprise to me. Shadow Man is a franchise that has been dead and buried for so long, sentenced to an eternity in Deadside. But Night Dive, who has been known to make remasters of some older games, announced this year that they would be remastering Mike Law's adventure. I was intrigued because Shadow Man was an old favorite of mine, but I was also apprehensive because, well, when it comes to games from this particular generation, Shadow Man having originally been made for the N64, you kind of wonder how well the game is going to hold up. I don't know about you, but I feel like that games from that particular generation frequently have a harder time holding up than maybe just about any other. So I had not played Shadow Man for quite a number of years. And I wondered,
Through the front door.
How am I going to like this game when I play it again? And what are they going to do to modernize it and maybe make things a bit more friendly for modern systems? And when I ended up playing it, I found that they made a lot of changes that I'd want. Basically, every kind of change that I'd want, short of being an actual full remake. Obviously, it's not that. But the game is a lot more playable now. And I had a lot of fun playing through it twice this year. I played through it the first time, not recording it, just, playing it on my own time. And then the second time I decided I would do a revisit playthrough of Shadow Man, since that was the first LP that I did. I did a playthrough of the remaster. And I did not get tired of playing it. Played it through twice, full, both times, getting all the Dark Souls, all of the items and weapons. And I enjoyed myself quite a bit both times. I felt that the changes they made of the game, the improvements, made it a lot more playable. They didn't change the core of the game or anything. They didn't really make any... I should say that really the adjustments they made were adjustments to make it more playable. So the controls I'm using now are the mouse and keyboard instead of a gamepad, and I find that using the mouse and keyboard and these new controls, Michael Leroy is much more agile, much more skillful as he moves around. The camera controls are much easier to use. It just becomes a much more playable game than the original was. And that is really what I wanted from a remaster. I wanted something that was going to take that original game and make it and turn the game into something that would be basically something you could carry forward into the future as basically the definitive version of the game. And I think
this truly is a terrible place.
Terrible. And I would say that's what this is. They didn't change the polygonal structure of the game. Very low polygons, of course, but they did add some graphic effects, increase the resolution of the textures, add lighting and shadow. They certainly did do a number of things to pretty up the game. But really the more important thing are the improvements made in the gameplay, as well as I should say creating brand new content that was originally going to be in the game, but was cut way back then, creating that new content, restoring things like unused music tracks to the game, because it does have a really good soundtrack. I do like Shadow Man's soundtrack quite a lot. They did also add some additional monologues. Not that many, but there were some additional monologues that were not used in the original game by Mike Leroy. And hey, I want as much Mike poetry as you can get in the game. Give me all of it. As of this point, I don't know if the remaster is still... I think it is still unfinished, because I do remember that there is an additional boss that they do intend to add. I don't think it's there yet. I believe it's called the Seraph Queen. When I did the playthrough of the game, it was not added into the game yet. As far as I know, it still isn't. So there should still be an update at some point adding that one remaining boss to the game. I would like to take a look at that when it happens. While there is a lot of nostalgia in play with me putting this game at number 5 on the list, it's also a lot of relief in seeing that one of my old favorite games is in a state where it is still a lot of fun to play. It has been modified to make it more playable than it ever was before, and also has been given bells and whistles to make it look nicer, to give it higher resolution, to give it an increased frame rate, to give it all the things you'd want from a modern game. But it is still that old game. It is still that old game given the modern niceties, and that is what I wanted. And even though that still makes for a much rougher game than most modern games released this year, hey, like I said, I played through this game twice this year. I had a really good time both times, and I did not get tired. I really do like the character of Michael Leroy, and I really do like the setting of Dead Side and Live Side. I still don't really know why Night Dive decided that they would remaster this game.
For complete crazies, these guys are totally organized, which definitely helps me some.
I don't know why they decided to do it, but I'm glad they did. I'm glad they did, and all I can say is thank you, Night Dive, for bringing back an old favorite that I never thought would be brought back.
Ah, shit! Like I'd let you get away. You'll be sliced to ribbons before you ever see the child. You will learn what it means to insist.
That's right, it's Village Resident Evil, the story about one man's hands and the ridiculous trauma applied to them. Resident Evil Village is the follow-up, of course, to Resident Evil 7. And of course, I was very excited to play. I do like some Resident Evil, and I liked RE7 a lot. RE Village promised to be bigger, more ambitious, whereas RE7 took place in a very samey environment throughout most of the game. Village decides that it is going to have you go from setting to setting to setting, from a snowy village to a fancy castle, to a reservoir, to a haunted house, to a steampunk factory. There is a lot of content in Village. You don't spend that much time in any particular part, which is kind of funny because Lady D was advertised a lot when this game was coming out, and it seemed like she was the primary villain. But Lady D, like most characters, really doesn't appear that much in the game. Ethan moves fast.
Running will get you nowhere!
And actually, running gets Ethan plenty of places. So, I really enjoyed Resident Evil Village. Now, no real question as to why. It took the gameplay and style of RE7 that I enjoyed quite a bit, and decided to put it in a completely new environment, and decided to expand the story, such as it is. Whereas RE7 tried to be scary, RE8 tries to be a lot more fun. Ethan's hands getting brutalized just becomes comedic at some point in the game. It's a little scary at the beginning, when you first encounter the Lycans, because they're really intense. But then once you start getting into the game proper, the tone of the game becomes a lot more RE4-ish. It's very deliberately has a much more of a lighthearted, dark comedy kind of tone.
You'll find your way to her once you're out of this castle.
RE Village never gets boring, because you never spend that much time in any one place. It's constantly moving you forward, constantly moving you on into different places, dealing with different characters, different enemies. And if I'm trying to think about what my favorite moment from this game was,
Hard times.
at the beginning of my playthrough of Resident Evil Village, I believe I asked if we really needed another game with Ethan as the protagonist, considering how many other characters could have been used. Could have brought back old favorites. You could have had Uncle Joe from RE7's DLC. I would like to see a full game with Uncle Joe. Maybe a brand new character. And I was asking, do we really want or need another game with Ethan Winters? And somehow, miraculously, by the end of the game, they answer that question, and the answer was yes. It was time for Ethan to justify his existence and become an actual character, and I was honestly kind of amazed that they did that. Ethan Winters, the blank slate from RE7, actually coming into his own as a character by the end of the game. I applaud Capcom for somehow doing that, for answering, yes, we do need another game with Ethan. And you will see why. Resident Evil 8, I do feel that it suffers from a bit of a problem that a lot of Resident Evil games do. It starts off very strong, progressively gets weaker. That's kind of a tradition, though, at this point with Resident Evil games. They're kind of front-loaded with the good stuff. I guess I can't complain about that at this point in the series. I would also say the story in Resident Evil Village gets way, way, way up its own ass. But again, it's Resident Evil, and maybe that's just something that could be expected at this point. With RE7, the story was much simpler. With RE Village, they try to go more complex as they try to explain how things work and what motivations certain characters have. And then once you get to the point where you're learning about how the giant mold is actually a thing that stores a mold database, and inside the database are consciousnesses of dead people, and maybe they can be pulled out. Once you get into that stuff, it's sort of like, oh, okay. All right. Maybe just back up a little bit. Maybe just back up a little bit here. I just felt that about the story. And then, of course, you got the obligatory, oh, actually, this is where Umbrella started. Remember Umbrella? This is where it all started, for now. Until a future game reveals that it actually started before this. Somehow. You know, complaining a bit. But RE Village, a lot of fun playing it. A lot of laughs were to be had. I enjoyed the cast of characters. I enjoyed the villains. And even though by the end of the game I was thinking, this is so stupid, it was stupid in the good way. Not stupid in the medium way, which is the bad way. RE Village is profoundly stupid in a good way. It embraces it, it hugs the stupid, and takes you on for a ride. And it is a ride I would highly suggest you get on. And when it comes to horror franchises these days, you know, there are not that many big popular ones. Resident Evil is the big one. And it does kind of warm my heart a little bit when this game comes out and actual mainstream audiences are paying attention to a survival horror game. It's the only franchise that can do it. It's Resident Evil. It's fun. It's stupid. This game plays very well. Looks fantastic. Resident Evil Village. It's my number 4 game of 2021.
Wait long.
Metroid Dread was it seemed like a big surprise when it was announced earlier this year. It was sort of a running joke years ago. I'm talking about years ago, where people would joke that Metroid Dread was going to be announced when it was rumored that it was being made for the Game Boy Advance. And a years-long running joke finally actually became reality when on a Nintendo Direct, Nintendo actually announced that Metroid Dread was coming out. Not just a new Metroid game, not just a new 2D Metroid game, but it's specifically Metroid Dread, the old GBA game that everyone gave up hope on in the mid-aughts was actually happening. That was the first surprise. The second surprise, it is really, really good. Like, this might have come out and maybe it just was like mediocre or maybe just okay. No, it is excellent. It is, I think, better than a lot of people thought it would be. The developers of this is Mercury Steam, who's had experience making this kind of game. They made the Castlevania Lords of Shadows games, and you might remember the second one of those was a DS game that was a traditional sort of Metroidvania-ish kind of game. I didn't like it so much. Then they made the remake of Metroid 2, Return of Samus. I did not play that one. People said it was pretty good, but there were aspects about it that maybe they didn't like. Then this game comes out, and it's possibly the best Metroid game. That's hard to say. It's hard to say if you can think about Super Metroid when that originally came out, and you look at this and you say, which one is better? I don't know. But you could definitely make a strong case that this is actually the best Metroid game. Just first of all, okay, presentation looks fantastic, runs extremely smoothly, rock solid, controls very well. I was talking about Deedlit and Wonder Labyrinth before and how I really like how that game controls. This game controls completely differently, as it should, because it's not a Metroidvania, it's a Metroid. And there is a distinction. There is an important distinction between how the traditional Metroidvania plays and how actual Metroid plays. This game feels very different than Deedlit, plays very different, but very smooth, controls completely rock solid, movement completely rock solid. Mercury Steam completely hitting it out of the park when they made this game. It is also a more complex game than you would expect. You're pressing a lot more buttons at once. You have a lot of techniques at your fingertips. Samus is capable of a whole lot that maybe she wasn't capable of in previous games. Can be difficult to get used to it because you may not really be expecting to have to do so many finger combinations to do the various moves and techniques that Samus has. But once you get it down, it all works exceedingly well. And speaking of that, I guess I should mention my favorite moment of the game. My favorite moment is the last boss. I don't want to talk too much about the last boss because don't want to get into specific spoilers. But the last boss, I think they did a tremendous job at creating an enemy that required you to take all of the movement mechanics and the weapons that you've been amassing and learning and putting that whole thing, putting it all together. Putting everything you've been learning and getting good at and giving you a final opponent who is the ultimate test of all these things you've been learning to do throughout this game. It's not a boss I expected. A traditional Metroid boss tends to be a screen-filling monster with a weak spot. You know what I mean by that. Metroid Dread has those. It has bosses like that. But the last boss, they give you a completely different kind of challenge. And I would say it is my favorite last boss of any Metroid game. Also, the hardest one, I died quite a few times and had to retry, but I didn't get frustrated. I thought the whole thing was fun all the way through. Every time you die against that boss, you just have to figure out what it is you need to do, what techniques you need to use, what weapons you need to use to get past the current phase and make it into the next phase. What it is you need to do to answer the business that this boss has given you. And like I said, I just think that they did a tremendous job just making everything come together. I thought when I first saw the game that it looked a bit too sterile, just the way the graphics looked, but I didn't think that way as I play through the game. You get a fairly good variety of environments. I thought that there was some good locations to look at. Good variety of enemies to fight. They give you a melee attack, which my understanding debuted in the Metroid 2 remake, and that really does open up a type of combat that I didn't really expect to be in this game, whereas you're not just shooting all the time, but rather you can run right up to enemies and counter their attacks, parry them, and give them big attacks in response. They just spent a lot of time figuring out how Samus should control, what kind of moves she should have, and how that all just comes together. And once you learn how to use her and get good at controlling her, extremely good gameplay. That's a monster butt. That is the butt of the monster. You got to slide under that, and there you go. Then you parry, and then you do this. Maybe only one complaint I might have against this game is that it's kind of hard to parse the map. When I got to parts where I had to really study the map to try to figure out where I might need to go next, the map looks quite a bit more complicated than maybe something like in Super Metroid. And I did have some difficulties in maybe figuring out what I'm looking at on the map and where I might need to go next. The game does do a good job of signposting you throughout the game, but there are some parts where you do need to take to the map, figure out where you haven't been, figure out where there were obstacles that you couldn't get by previously, but you can now. But like I said, the map is a much more complex than something like Super Metroid, so I did have a little bit of trouble with that. Another complaint I might have, music, not that memorable. It does have some of the old themes that you might expect, but overall, it doesn't have as strong as a soundtrack as the previous Metroid games that you're familiar with. But these are just minor complaints, I think, because overall, I feel that this game plays fantastically, looks fantastic, and maybe I feel that this game is very welcome, since Metroid has been a franchise that has been a little dead for quite some years. It's been quite some time since the last good 2D Metroid game, and of course, people tend to think about Other M when they think about how this franchise ended, and what a shame that was. So seeing this new game come out that hits all of the good marks and presents Samus in a much better way than she was presented in Other M. On top of being a great game, it's also a great comeback for an old favorite franchise. And that's why Metroid Dread is number 3 on my list for 2021.
Vayan por detrás.
Who are these people? What are they planning? Chainsaw. Shit. Son of a...
So, a completely unexpected, absolutely fantastic adaptation of Resident Evil 4 to VR. So information on this game had been leaked some time ago, and people were kind of confused by it, saying, what do you mean there's going to be a VR port of RE4? That doesn't even make sense. It's not a first-person game. How is this going to be a VR game? That was the question people had, and the answer ended up being one of the best VR games. It's magnificent. It's tremendous. It's the most pure fun I had with a video game in 2021. The game takes full advantage of VR, which means the game plays completely differently, even though you're aware of what this game is. You're aware of the areas, the enemies, the weapons. But part of the joy of playing this game is figuring out how the VR works, and how that means you can now deal with all of these things in very different ways than you would have been able to when playing the original version of the game. Original version of the game is much slower, much more methodical. This is just lean over that window, and then shoot the guy coming up, and then turn around, and there's a guy with a chainsaw coming at you. Resident Evil 4 was always one of my favorite games. Back when I first played it, it was near the tail end of the PS2 generation. I thought it was tremendous. I wasn't sure at the time about the change of Resident Evil from classic survival horror to a more action-based game. But when I played it, I instantly loved it. And I was very, very much looking forward to seeing what a VR version of this game would even be. Because, sometimes you get a VR version of a game, it's maybe it doesn't really take advantage of VR. Maybe you just play it like the regular game, but the camera is in the headset. That's not what this is. This is a completely redesign of the game, a remake of the game. It's not RE4 remake. That's probably still coming from Capcom. But they did remake this game from the ground up in order to completely change how it played. And if I'm thinking about what my favorite moment of the game is, I'm thinking about how... Well, I can't say it's like a set piece or part of the story or anything like that, because I already know about all that, I already played the game years ago. I already knew everything that was going to happen. But I would say that probably my favorite moment is the point where I realized that the game would allow you to do things that weren't possible in the original game if you thought of them. So it didn't necessarily tell you that, but a moment that comes to mind was the first time I used dual weapons. So near the beginning of the game, there was a point where I pulled out the handgun with one hand, and then tried pulling out the knife with the other hand, and it worked. I now had a handgun in one hand and a knife in the other. Obviously, that's not something you could do in Resident Evil 4. You can't dual wield, but you can in the VR version if you think to try that. Or another example, later on I didn't think to do that with guns immediately, I don't think. I think it took a while before I had the idea to try that with a gun, where I pulled out the handgun and then just passed it to my other hand and thought, well, let me try to reach over my shoulder and pull out the shotgun, and now it worked, and now I was holding guns akimbo. And doing that really breaks this game, because
Everyone going. Bingo?
Difficulty level is really not meant for you to just, strafe everywhere and for you to just quickly pull out guns akimbo and open fire everywhere. But they decided to allow you to break that balance for the sake of VR hijinks. And I love that decision. I love that they did not try to restrict you in order to keep the difficulty balance of the original game. I love that they just let you try to do anything that you could think of, and frequently it would work. I was surprised at how well these old GameCube environments and models worked in VR. There's a great sense of presence when playing through the game in VR. It feels like you're really there. Well, that's kind of what you want from a VR game, but it's a very cool, very different kind of experience to play through these levels, these areas that you've already played through many times, you're already familiar with. You've seen them many times, but now you're in the game. The only thing I need to get like some sort of vest that will electrocute me when I get hit by an enemy to really increase my immersion. Say if a Gyarados slashes me, I want to feel current going through my chest, and then it's like I'm really there. It's like I'm really there in some mysterious part of Europe. I find after playing this game and doing that whole thing with Ashley, where I was explaining things to her, I find that sort of has affected my own internal monologue, where now if I'm thinking of a problem that's been presented to me, I'll start off by thinking, Ashley, and then just starting to explain the situation mentally. I don't know if that might be a bad thing. It might be a bad thing. Ashley is not there to offer any advice, but then she never offered advice in the game. She never offered advice in the game. Man, that would have been scary if she did. Imagine if they did that. Imagine if they tracked if the player was actually acknowledging Ashley and they added something where Ashley responds to you. That I don't usually get scared in video games. That would have gotten me if they did that. They should patch that in for Ashley to somehow acknowledge or respond to you if you keep trying to interact with her. She doesn't do that. But what this game does do is present an extremely fun experience. Like I said, it's the most fun I had with any video game this year. I love it. I'm sure I'm going to be playing this many times in the future. I'm looking forward to Mercenaries coming out. And I don't know if there's going to be any other RE games ported to the Quest in this way. I really don't know if there are any future plans for that. I can only hope. But like I said, this was the most pure fun experience I had this year, and that is why Resident Evil 4 VR is number 2 in my list of games from 2021.
Say one of these fascist or communist things or fuck off.
It's not a surprise that number 1 is Disco Elysium. What else could it be? Disco Elysium, of course, did not originally come out in 2021. It came out in 2019. But this year, the final cut came out with a lot more content, including some very important content, that being full voice acting. And I am glad that I waited to play this game until this happened, until we got the full voice acting, because all the voice acting in Disco Elysium is excellent. First, I should say, why is this number 1? Because I said that Resident Evil 4 VR number 2 was the most fun game I played all year. So what is number 1? Why is it here? And that is, thinking about Disco Elysium, I feel that it has to have the best writing in a video game that I've ever seen. I feel that this has to be a high watermark for games writing. I don't know what could be better. So I was thinking about that, about just the
And I really would like to.
The plot that we have, the dialogue, getting attached to these characters, having conversations that deal with the political, that deal with some heavy subjects, but also deal with some bizarre slapstick comedy. And it effortlessly just goes between them. The humor never feels inappropriate, but it's also very funny. It's genuinely funny. I mentioned before with Devotion that someone trying to write a genuinely haunting story in a game is rare, and it usually doesn't work out. Comedy in a video game is also really hard. I find that games that try to be funny usually fall on their face. They usually don't succeed. This game is really funny, and at the same time, it also goes back and forth between a serious plot about a murder, a serious plot about a town in decline, and the people who were just forced to live in this dying town, and conversations about the political situation of the town, the country, the greater world, and getting into conversations about certain political beliefs, such as communism, such as capitalism,
Try not to get caught in a...
maybe a little bit of fascism, if you please. And I found it remarkable at how well this game just moves between these different subjects so effortlessly, just demonstrating just a mastery of writing, regardless of what it is that you're doing or what the subject is that you're talking about. You could be talking about the war-torn history of this town. You could be talking about the Cold War, basically, that's happening between the Union and the corporation, and who the players involved are, and what the history is, and which side do you think you want to be on. Or you could talk about forcing this old man to give you his sandwich. Like, you could do either one. You could do both if you want. And if I'm thinking about story-heavy games that I've played before versus Disco Elysium, I feel there's a very good chance that I will never play a game in my life that has the writing that Disco Elysium has. I feel that is a very real possibility that I will never see another game that's as written as well as this. The voice acting is also somehow very good, especially the main narrator, who apparently this was the main narrator's first voice acting job, is what I thought I read. But the voice is masterful and completely pulls off the bizarre narration that the VA has to read. I got really involved in this story. I got really into it. Got really into the characters of Raphael and Kim. And at the beginning, I might have wanted, mess around, be a stupid cop doing stupid thing. As time goes on, however, you get more involved into what the situation is. And maybe you don't want to be such a bad cop. Maybe you want to be able to clean Raphael up. Maybe you want to get him respectable. Maybe you feel emotionally involved in his situation. I do love this little bit of dialogue. What's a book? Whoa, hold your horses, little girl. You're getting way ahead of me. What's a book? I felt really invested in Raphael's past, discovering who he is, why he is, and how he ended up forgetting everything. What could possibly be that bad that he would need to forget it all? And in the end, realizing that, oh yeah, it really was that bad.
Okay, sir.
And
Any questions you have? I hope they're about.
I felt that the story just happened to nail it in almost every respect.
She's inside.
As far as it being a murder mystery, I kind of love at how. Well, I don't really want to talk much about how the murderer is revealed, but I really like how it just comes off as not as sort of the dramatic climactic thing you might expect from a murder mystery, but there's just sort of a a feeling of that you've learned everything you need to know. And when the person finally appears on screen, it's like, yeah, this is it. This is where this is going to end. It's not like a dramatic unmasking. It's just sort of a feeling of, I know everything I need to know now, and I know that where this is going.
Mom, keep this place running. Mom says
it's not a big town, but there are just interesting people to talk to. There's a lot to look at. You could go into this bookstore and like look at a bunch of books about Hjemdallerman, the man from Hjemdal, and maybe you want to read one of his books and emulate him, or Dick Mullen, the great fictional detective. Maybe you want to read about the innocences. Want to read about history of this world. Maybe you want to learn about forbidden knowledge that your partner doesn't want you to know from the corporation's representative. Maybe you need to give Kim the slip and learn about that information. Maybe you need to get into bed, not literally, with the union leader because you need to grease his wheels, not literally, to get anywhere in this town. Like I said, what this game was going for, I completely bought into it. In terms of the characters, the story, the dialogue, the setting, I ended up completely buying into all of it. As far as what my favorite moment in the game is, when I was thinking about this, I was probably thinking that it was going to be the stick bug. And if you know the stick bug, then you know. But thinking about it, I'm thinking maybe my favorite moment is the tribunal. Because the tribunal is a section where they completely amp up the tone of the game. It is a legitimately tense section in a story that so far has been kind of wacky and bizarre, where so far through the game, you've been playing this wacky, bizarre cop doing his wacky, bizarre things. You could play it as a normal cop, but I don't know if does anyone do that? Probably not. And then at the end of the game, you meet some people who are not going to put up with your comedy bullshit. People who intend to kill everyone in sight. Trained killers, and you realize, we're out of our depth. But we have to talk them down. We have to try to do that. Maybe there's no happy ending here, but we have to try to at least minimize the damage. Our character is not the right man for the job here. You need more backup, but you don't have that backup. It's you versus some people who completely outclass you. And it is like I said, it's a genuinely tense situation, and I feel that that's the highlight of the game, where you finally have to do some real cop stuff and you have to try to do it. Disco Elysium, my #1 game of the year.
Why is that?
Best story that I probably will see in a video game, and how can it be anything else but #1?
She looks around anxiously.
So that's it. That's the my top 10 games of 2021, with an 11th game, that being Ghost Trick, as my favorite old game of the year. But for my top 10, here you go. Disco Elysium, Resident Evil 4 VR, Metroid Dread, Resident Evil Village, Man Remastered, Deedlit in Wonder Labyrinth, Devotion, Fantasian, No More Heroes 3, and Inscription. These are my 10 favorite games of the year, and I didn't even play everything I wanted to play in this year. There's games that came out that I wanted to play that I never got to. Played a number of games this year, so there still could have been games that maybe would have made this list if I had just been able to get around to playing everything, but I did not. We'll see about next year. We'll see how that goes. But this year is over. 2021 has come to an end, and like I said, the premise that we usually have at the end of the year, that we have hope that next year is going to be better, that next year is going to be good, I don't think any of us have that illusion anymore. So I won't wish you a happy new year. I'll wish you a survivable new year. I hope everyone survives 2022. And in the meantime, we can pass the time playing video games. I hope everyone enjoyed this year in video games. I hope you enjoyed the streams and videos that I've been posting. And hope you continue to stick around in 2022. We'll see what we play then. We'll see if any games from the stream make the list next year. Or if we maybe play some terrible games that don't make the list. Maybe we'll do some of that as well. As far as all I can say right now is good night. Have a good, well, end of year. I'll be seeing ya in 2022.
We're closed. There's another funeral home across town. I can give you the number.
Marianne.
Who is this?
You don't know me, Marianne, but I know you.
Look, if this is a joke...
You need to listen to me, Marianne.
Okay, I'm hanging up.
I know what you are.
What? Who is this?
My name is Thomas. I need your help.
Listen, if that's all you've got,
No, there's more. I can give you the answers you've been looking for your whole life. But I need you to trust me.
Trust you? I don't even know you.
It all starts with a dead girl.
What did you say?
The Neva Resort. Find me there. Please. The light, it's almost gone. It's not dark yet, but it's getting there. You're the only one who can stop it. You're my only chance.
Hello? Hello? Shit.
Do it. Fuck it. Do it. Fuck it. Do it. Fuck it.
The way that you are, the way you flow with me, is that the way that you are? Don't you think it's cool, running down your game? Everyone is a fool, never you to blame. Someone else will pay for you. It's just another day. Oh, why you have to go and do that? Why you have to go? Oh, oh, oh. Is that the way that you are?